Everything you think you know about Dr. Frankenstein is wrong. Mary Shelley didn't create a fictional monster. She was writing about a real man who was already dead when her book was published. A man who boiled human corpses in giant cauldrons, electrocuted cadavers with primitive machines, and believed he could crack the code of eternal life. His name was Giovanni Aldini, and his experiments were so horrifying that they inspired the most famous monster story ever told. But here's what will shatter everything you believed. Aldini didn't just experiment on dead bodies. He performed his most shocking procedures on living prisoners, moments before their execution. And some of his subjects moved. The year was 1803. London's Newgate prison buzzed with an energy that had nothing to do with justice. Word had spread through the grimy streets that something unprecedented was about to happen. Giovanni Aldini, nephew of the famous Luigi Galvani, had arrived with a collection of copper rods, metal plates, and a mysterious apparatus that sparked with electricity. George Forster had just been hanged for murdering his wife and child. His body, still warm, still twitching from the rope's final embrace, was about to become the centerpiece of the most disturbing scientific demonstration London had ever witnessed. What happened next would haunt witnesses for the rest of their lives. Aldini approached the corpse with the precision of a surgeon and the enthusiasm of a madman. He attached his electrical apparatus to Forster's face, sending jolts of galvanic current through the dead man's jaw. The crowd gasped as the corpse's mouth began to move, contorting into what looked like expressions of agony and rage. But Aldini wasn't finished. He moved his electrodes to the dead man's rectum and genitals. More electricity, more movement. The body convulsed so violently that several witnesses fled the room, convinced they were watching a resurrection. One observer later wrote that Forster's left eye actually opened, staring directly at him with what seemed like murderous intent. The crowd erupted in chaos. Some screamed that Aldini had brought the dead back to life. Others whispered that he was practicing dark magic, that he had made a pact with the devil himself. They had no idea how right they were about the devil part. Giovanni Aldini wasn't just conducting random experiments. He had a plan, an obsession that consumed every waking moment of his existence. He believed that electricity was the spark of life itself, and if he could master it, he could defeat death forever. Born into a family of scientists in Bologna, Aldini grew up surrounded by anatomical specimens and electrical devices. His uncle Luigi Galvani had already discovered that dead frogs' legs would twitch when touched with different metals, a phenomenon that became known as galvanism. But where Galvani saw mere muscle contractions, Aldini saw something far more profound. He saw immortality. Night after night, in his laboratory beneath the University of Bologna, Aldini worked with an intensity that terrified even his closest assistants. He acquired corpses through means that were rarely questioned and never fully documented. Executed criminals, bodies stolen from morgues, patients who died in hospitals, all became subjects for his increasingly bizarre experiments. The smell alone would have driven most men mad. Decomposing flesh mixed with the acrid scent of burning metal and ozone. But Aldini breathed it in like perfume, intoxicated by the possibility of victory over humanity's greatest enemy. His methods grew more extreme with each passing month. He built massive copper cauldrons where he would boil corpses for hours, believing that the combination of heat and electrical current would somehow preserve or restore their vital essence. Witnesses described the horrifying sight of bodies floating in these bubbling vats, their skin peeling away while Aldini applied electrical shocks to their exposed muscles and organs. But it was his experiments on freshly executed prisoners that truly crossed into the realm of nightmare. Aldini had convinced authorities across Europe that his work served the greater good of science. What he didn't tell them was that he had begun timing his experiments to begin while his subjects were still technically alive, in the precious moments between clinical death and biological death, when the soul supposedly lingered before departing forever. If this revelation shocked you, smash that like button and prepare yourself for what's coming next, because Aldini's most disturbing discovery is about to change everything you thought you knew about life and death. The breakthrough came during a winter night in 1804. Aldini had been working with the body of a young woman executed for infanticide. As he applied electrical current to her heart, something unprecedented happened. The organ began beating again, not just twitching, actually pumping blood through her circulatory system. For 17 minutes, the dead woman's heart beat steadily while Aldini frantically took notes. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. But 17 minutes was enough. Enough to prove that death wasn't the absolute boundary he had once believed. If he could restart a heart, what else could he restore? Aldini became obsessed with this question. He began seeking out subjects who had died from different causes: drowning, poisoning, disease, convinced that each type of death would teach him something new about the process of restoration. His laboratory became a charnel house of experiments that defied every moral and ethical boundary of his time. Local authorities began to whisper about the strange occurrences surrounding Aldini's work. Bodies that were supposed to be buried were reported walking the streets at night. Families claimed their deceased relatives had returned home, though they seemed different, changed. The Catholic Church launched an investigation, but Aldini's connections ran deep. He had supporters among the nobility, scientists who praised his work publicly while privately harboring serious doubts about his methods and motivations. What do you think about a man who claimed to serve science while potentially unleashing something far more sinister? Let us know in the comments, because the evidence suggests Aldini's success rate was much higher than he ever admitted publicly. By 1805, Aldini's reputation had spread across Europe like wildfire. He traveled from city to city, performing public demonstrations that attracted crowds in the thousands. But these weren't mere scientific lectures. They were theatrical productions that blurred the line between education and entertainment, between science and necromancy. In Vienna, he reanimated the corpse of a nobleman who had died in a duel, causing such a sensation that the emperor himself demanded a private demonstration. In Paris, he worked with the bodies of guillotine victims, their severed heads reconnected to their torsos through an intricate network of copper wires and electrical devices. Each success made him bolder. Each failure made him more desperate. The turning point came during a demonstration in Rome, where Aldini claimed he would bring back a criminal who had been dead for over a week. The body, severely decomposed, was arranged on a marble table before an audience that included cardinals, scientists, and representatives of several European governments. When Aldini activated his apparatus, something went catastrophically wrong. The corpse didn't just move. It sat up, opened its eyes, and spoke. Witnesses reported that it said a single word: "Why?" Then it collapsed back onto the table, this time truly dead, while the audience erupted in pandemonium. The Catholic Church immediately declared Aldini a heretic and banned him from operating within papal territories. But the damage to his reputation went beyond religious condemnation. Several witnesses to the Rome demonstration later reported experiencing nightmares, visions, and what they described as supernatural encounters with the reanimated corpse. Aldini had crossed a line that perhaps should never have been crossed. As word of his increasingly disturbing experiments spread, public opinion began to turn against him. The same crowds that had once cheered his demonstrations now viewed him with suspicion and fear. Parents warned their children about the mad doctor who stole bodies and played God with the dead. But Aldini's greatest enemy wasn't public opinion. It was time itself. The man who sought to defeat death was aging rapidly, his obsession taking a visible toll on his physical and mental health. Colleagues noted that he had developed a nervous tic, constantly checking his pulse as if afraid his own heart might stop beating. He became paranoid, convinced that the families of his subjects were plotting against him, that rival scientists were stealing his research. Most disturbing of all, he began experimenting on himself. Subscribe to our channel to join our community of history seekers, because what Aldini did to his own body in pursuit of immortality will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the limits of human ambition. In his private journals, discovered decades after his death, Aldini documented his attempts to apply electrical current to his own vital organs. He believed that by regularly shocking his heart, brain, and nervous system, he could extend his lifespan indefinitely. The journal entries, written in increasingly erratic handwriting, described the excruciating pain of these self-administered treatments and his growing conviction that they were working. "The electricity courses through my veins like liquid fire," he wrote. "Each shock brings me closer to understanding the divine mechanism that governs life and death. I feel my cells regenerating, my organs strengthening. Soon I will be beyond the reach of time itself. But Aldini's pursuit of immortality was having the opposite effect. The electrical treatments were slowly killing him, damaging his nervous system and causing his organs to fail one by one. His assistant later testified that Aldini's final months were marked by violent seizures, periods of unconsciousness, and episodes where he would speak to people who weren't there. People he claimed were his former experimental subjects, come to visit him from beyond the grave. The irony was perfect. The man who sought to conquer death was being destroyed by his own methods. In 1834, Giovanni Aldini died in his laboratory, surrounded by the electrical apparatus he had hoped would make him immortal. His body was found connected to his own devices, apparently having administered one final, fatal shock to himself in a desperate attempt to achieve the breakthrough that had eluded him for 3 decades. But death wasn't the end of Aldini's story. It was the beginning of his most lasting contribution to human culture. When Mary Shelley began writing Frankenstein in 1816, she drew inspiration from many sources. But none was more influential than the widely circulated accounts of Aldini's experiments. The young writer had attended lectures on galvanism, read reports of corpses being reanimated through electrical stimulation, and heard whispered stories about a mad Italian doctor who had tried to play God with the bodies of the dead. Shelley transformed Aldini's real-life horror into literary immortality, creating a monster that has haunted popular culture for over 2 centuries. But she understood something that Aldini never did. The true monster wasn't the reanimated corpse. It was the man who created it. Victor Frankenstein's hubris, his obsession with conquering death, his willingness to violate every moral boundary in pursuit of knowledge. These weren't fictional character traits. They were the documented characteristics of Giovanni Aldini, lifted directly from the historical record and transformed into one of literature's greatest cautionary tales. The legacy of the real Dr. Frankenstein extends far beyond Mary Shelley's novel. Modern medical techniques like defibrillation, pacemakers, and electroshock therapy all trace their origins back to Aldini's pioneering work with galvanism. The man who boiled corpses and electrocuted the dead inadvertently laid the groundwork for treatments that have saved millions of lives. But perhaps more importantly, Aldini's story serves as a warning about the dangerous intersection of scientific ambition and moral blindness. In his desperate quest to defeat death, he lost sight of what it means to be truly alive. He became so obsessed with preserving biological function that he forgot about preserving human dignity, compassion, and ethical responsibility. Today, as we stand on the brink of revolutionary advances in genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and life extension technologies, Giovanni Aldini's cautionary tale feels more relevant than ever. We have the power to manipulate life and death in ways that would have seemed miraculous to previous generations. But do we have the wisdom to use that power responsibly? The real Dr. Frankenstein sought immortality and found only death. He wanted to be remembered as humanity's savior and became its warning. He tried to create life and succeeded only in creating nightmares that continue to haunt us centuries after his death. But perhaps that's the most fitting legacy for a man who believed that death was just another problem to be solved through science and determination. Giovanni Aldini achieved a kind of immortality after all, not through his electrical experiments, but through the monster he inspired, the cautionary tale that bears his spiritual fingerprints, and the questions he raised about the proper limits of human ambition. The next time you see a movie about Frankenstein's monster, remember that you're not just watching a work of fiction. You're witnessing the echo of real experiments conducted by a real man who genuinely believed he could defeat death through copper wires and electrical current. So here's the final question that Giovanni Aldini's life forces us to confront. If you had the power to bring back the dead, to extend life indefinitely, to play God with the fundamental forces of existence, would you be able to resist the temptation? Or would you, like Aldini, become so obsessed with the possibility of victory over death that you'd lose sight of what makes life worth living in the first place? What do you think? Are there some boundaries that science should never cross? Or is the pursuit of knowledge worth any risk? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more shocking stories from history's darkest corners.